Today we have a special folklore lunch. It's a discussion panel, and this discussion panel is dedicated to oral history in times of war, reflections on witnessing the War Summer Institute, Krakow, Poland. And we have 3 presenters or discussion participants today. And our first presenter is Gelinada Grinchenko, and she is a professor of history at the Department of Ukrainian Studies, Faculty of Philosophy, Karazin National University, Kharkiv, Ukraine, and scholar at risk at University of Wuppertal, Germany, editor-in-chief of the Ukrainian-based academic peer-reviewed journal Ukraina Moderna, head of Ukrainian Oral History Association, member of German-Ukrainian Historical Commission. Our next presenter is Natalia Khanenko-Friesen. She is the director of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies and Hutsulak Chair in Ukrainian Culture and Ethnography, Department of Modern Languages and Cultural Studies, Faculty of Arts, University of Alberta. Her research interests include oral history, post-socialism in Europe and Ukraine, diasporic identities, labor migration, and Ukrainian Canadian culture. And our third presenter is Iuliia Skubytska. She received her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 2018. After this, she moved to working in Ukrainian civil society, where in 2020-22, she served as the director of the War Childhood Museum, Ukraine. Throughout the academic year 2022-23, Iuliia is an associate research fellow at Princeton University. Welcome, and please.
Thank you, Yelena, very much for these brief introductions. I will take over and just remind all of our participants that we are connecting from the Treaty 6 territory, the land of many indigenous nations, from the city of Amiskwa-Siwaskahikan, the land of Amiskwa-Siwaskahikan. And we in Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta are fully committed to respecting and upholding the relationship between the indigenous peoples whose land we are living on and ourselves. We are to continue on today in the form of roundtable discussion involving the myself and 2 more scholars who were part of the Witnessing the War Summer Institute, Folklore Center, the Hutsulak Chair in Ukrainian Culture and Ethnography, and other partners internationally and at the University of Alberta have organized this past summer. Leading a peaceful life in a stable society is, of course, an immense privilege, and Ukrainians in Canada have been definitely benefiting from peace, democracy, multiculturalism for as long as they have been living in this country. So these are exactly the conditions that allowed Ukrainian Canadians to prosper as a cultural, powerful community, and also to develop strong academic presence, sustained research agendas focused on maintenance of cultural heritage, documentation of historical experiences, celebration of cultural accomplishments. For sure, social change has taken place, and exactly is the reason why this documentation was taking place as well. And it is social change, anthropologists argue, that dictates the need for us to reflect on what is changing, what is being lost, what is being ahead of us as well. Writing memoirs is one such practice, which allows us to come to terms with what has been disappearing, what transformations have taken around us and within ourselves. Conducting local history is another method. Of course, ethnographic research, as traditionally as we know it, would be another fundamental method of research, documenting cultural uniqueness of Ukrainian Canadians, for example. But are these social changes of large scope, that those forced, abrupt, and violent social changes, as the wars are, lead to some other outcomes rather than to pressing needs for us to reflect on disappearing pasts? These outcomes are severe trauma, the profound loss of loved ones, of stable life, the obliteration of the future, the obliteration of the culture. The renewed full-fledged invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022 brought about exactly this kind of devastation to Ukraine and Ukrainians. And those are the contexts in which many of our researchers, especially those in Ukraine have swiftly transformed the course of their academic activities and began embarking on a new kind of research altogether. And the circumstances definitely warrant that. As of September 2022, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we know that more than 12 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine since February 24. Some have returned, but currently, as of this month, nearly 7 million people remain to be displaced internally in Ukraine. Another 7 million or more are living elsewhere as displaced persons. So this, of course, brings us to a profound component of Ukrainian society being severely disrupted, not to mention, of course, the war affair itself ongoing on the territory of many regions of Ukraine. And it is in this context that we have seen also the immense increase in testimony research. Such research has been on the way in Ukraine since March 2022 or even February 2022. New initiatives began to emerge throughout the spring and the summertime in Ukraine, internationally, in the countries where Ukrainians have settled temporarily or who knows for how long. So this sense of urgency in the research communities centered on the necessity to document the experiences of war crimes, persecution, experiences of exile, displacement, but also their experiences of resilience, mobilization, and some other accompanying developments as well. Many projects, as I've mentioned, have been announced by various academic centers, various NGOs, community organizations, and I'm not even touching upon the grassroots movement on self-reflectivity, which takes place on social media independently of these established academic and NGO centers. We certainly have seen, as I said, academic partners of ours joining this research: Ukrainian Catholic University, Lviv Center for Urban History, Kyiv School of Economics, Kyiv National University of Taras Shevchenko, Lviv National University, our colleagues throughout the south of Ukraine, Zaporizhia, Berdyansk, Kherson, our colleagues in the western parts of Ukraine where refugees are arriving or have settled already, all are engaged in this kind of work. Not surprisingly, then, throughout the spring, we also have witnessed the emerging debates in social media, focusing on pros and cons of this rapid response research. Some groups, some camps, so to speak, have insisted that we need to do documentation immediately because the expediency and fluidness of these experiences. Others began warning and cautioning that stepping into this trauma-infused field of suffering without careful consideration of proper methodologies, proper ways of building relationship with our respondents is dangerous. So we've seen these debates unfolding in front of our eyes on social media. And it is exactly in response to these very heated conversations that the Hutzulak Chair at the Cool Folklore Center, the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta, and our international partners represented here by Gelinada, Grinchenko, for example, have come together and formed yet another rapid response to the war by offering and hosting an international summer institute on how to do oral historical and interview-based research in times of war. I am asking Marina now to share the link to this particular event, and you will see right now in the chat the document which highlights the pros and cons, highlights the organization of the Institute as such. Let me maybe say a few words before I invite my colleagues to reflect on the work of this Institute. I'd like to reflect very briefly on the concept of it. While we have seen our colleagues immediately engaging in documentation and research, interview-based research, we also understood that this work requires careful training and preparation. So therefore, we focus specifically on organizing a podium and a venue, which will allow us to bridge many planes and construe a creative, respectful space for a dialogue relying on international expertise in war oral history or trauma oral history research, and also bringing in young and determined researchers to get involved with us also in the capacity of participants / trainees as such. Our institute was a tremendous success. We've had only 3 months to prepare it, which was unheard of for such a scope of an organization. We had been inundated with applications. We only could accept 15 people. Out of 130 applications which have come from around the world, we did accept about 30, with additional people showing up on the doors of our institute and joining us as we continued working with. We asked for leading voices from the field of oral history, first and above all, to join us in this conversation, to provide Ukrainian researchers, especially those amongst the younger generation of Ukrainian researchers, with some background expose on what has been happening in the field of oral history when it came to parallel, similar past experiences, such wars. We've introduced the grassroots researchers, when invited rather, and introduced the grassroots researchers from Bosnia and Herzegovina, such as our colleague Hasan Hasanovic was with us sharing his expertise on how to reflect on and how to build oral historical work on the basis of mass atrocities which had been committed on the grounds of the village of Srebrenica, which of course we all know now is a site of the major genocide of the 20th century in Europe. And we also had asked colleagues from legal profession to join us and to reflect on repercussions and aspects of our work and impact of our work would have on exactly those directions of research where we're focusing on collection of oral testimony. As you can see, the second part of our institute focused exactly on the training seminars or conversations. We had them without necessarily differentiating who was in training and who was training who. We knew we had experts in the room all the way through. It is exactly in this venue of recognizing that those people who have joined our institute as participants have brought their own experience into the room and conversation that we had, that I've been lucky to be joined by both powerful voices, also very powerful voices in the field of oral history of Ukraine altogether. One being Gelinada Grinchenko, my colleague, who is the co-organizer of this event and representative and the president of the Ukrainian Oral History Association. But another colleague who I've met through the institute is Iuliia Skubytska, another powerful researcher of Ukraine, who could speak a little bit more about her experiences as we'll come to that. Our conversation today will unfold in 3 rounds. I had a few questions prepared for my esteemed guests, and let's start with that. So thank you, Elena, for introducing us briefly. And I wanted to start, Gelinada and Iuliia, perhaps with first with a few words about yourself to just expand a little bit more. Tell us about your research, your recent research projects, and have you changed your work when the war had started? Did you have to adjust somehow? And importantly for us, what about your own positionality as a researcher with the beginning of the war? What had happened? Has it changed as well? So just briefly, or not so briefly, we have 10 minutes for each round. So Gelinada, would you please maybe? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm not thinking that will be very briefly because, you know, that was a long time ago when I was asked about my current research. We are mostly speaking about what to do now, how to interview people now, and we a little bit forget about what we were doing before the war started and how our research changed. So I would like, I will try in several words tell you about my current research, which was interrupted, which was very influenced by the war. Since 2021, among many other things, of course, I'm working on a book with the title On Kharkiv and Ourselves, the City Fates and Experiences in Its Inhabitants' Oral Histories. A little bit long title, but that is about oral history of Second World War in Kharkiv. And this book consists from 3 parts. The first one, that is beginning of the Nazi-Soviet war and Nazi invasion in Kharkiv. The second part is the Holocaust and Nazi crimes in Kharkiv. And the third part, that is about everyday life under occupation, that is about liberation and end of the war. I began my work on this book with one personal and several research goals. As a researcher, I am trying to analyze mostly the plots, the stories, the choosing of genres, how people are talking about their experience, mostly as about how they live their life in reality. So I'm trying to analyze the characters, the main heroes of stories. So that is mostly about their life stories than about life histories. All this book is based on the oral histories and my sources are mostly from the so-called Spielberg collection. You know, that is the show foundation of the University of the Visual Archive of the University of South California, and another big collection that is the interviews which we gathered during the last 3 years, starting in 2018 and until 2021. That was the project Voices, organized and realized by the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center in Kyiv. So there are hundreds of interviews which are analyzing, and as to individual component, individual goal, why I started to do that research, it's my desire to dedicate this book to my mother. She was born and raised in Kharkiv, met war as a little girl, and she and her mother, my grandmother, were evacuated from Kharkiv and then come back in already liberated city. What is interesting and what is new, I think, that is really new practice in oral history writing, that parallel to this book, together with the great team of filmmakers, and that is really great team because I have already got the feedbacks that the films are really nice and very attractive. So we are making so-called accompaniments, teasers to every part of this book. The first one, the link, please, Marina, share in the chat. The first part is already published. It is uploaded to the YouTube channel of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, which supported this idea. The second part we finally finished during the war, and that was namely this film, which I connected and which in the framework of working with which I shifted all my, not shifted, but I changed all my understanding of how to do oral histories. So that was the evening before the war, that was the 23rd of February, when we finished to compose the oral history to the second part of the film, which is devoted to the Holocaust. Really, I did not sleep all this night because I was thinking, and trust me, I was thinking that we decided not to show bombing by the visual resources, by the photos. We decided to draw this bombing, and exactly in the morning, the real bomb fell to Kharkiv. From this very moment, so I really started to think about oral history as about such a praxis where our responsibility, where our self-reflection, and where our understanding that people are so involving in the suffering, that should be the center of our research. Firstly, we should be self-reflective. Firstly, we should understand that what they are feeling and what we are feeling, that is very, very comparable things, and as if we are all the very one person, the simple person, as if we are the one human being which is surviving and which is telling about this or that. And another thing which, of course, very, very much influenced my praxis right now, my thinking about oral history, because really from the very beginning of the war, I stopped to conduct interviews. Who knows me know that I don't, till now, I'm very skeptical about conducting interviews during the war. I would like to propose to wait for the certain time to pass and to give an opportunity to these people to come in terms with their very, very painful experience. But one thing which happened in my life, and after which I am thinking about very long time which should pass to come back in our mind to this war is such that is the very irony of my family. My mother was at the same age, absolutely at the same age, when she evacuated from Kharkiv as my son. My mother and my son were 4 years and 8 months long when they left Kharkiv. And for me, this irony, this composition, that is the starting point of thinking that all of us are so involved into the war that we are really to rethink how to conduct our interviews and how to talk to people as to ourselves. Probably later I will talk about my idea to combine oral history and autoethnography. I think that is a fruitful idea, but probably I will do that later. So for this round, that's a lot from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Gelinada. There's no doubt that there's so much intersection of, as you just described, between your previous work focusing on World War II and its aftermath, and of course, finding yourself in the amidst this new war. Iuliia, what about yourself? How has war changed your academic life?
Well, for the past 4 years, I've been more engaged in civil society, although I've been working on my own articles. And I believe that it informs the way I address the challenges right now. So I spent 2 years working in socially beneficial communications within civil society. I've been the grant writer, so basically I was developing communication campaigns. And in 2020, I became the director of the War Childhood Museum in Ukraine, which means that I supervised the creation of an archive of stories that we recorded with children and young people affected by the war in Ukraine starting from 2014, affected by Russian aggression against Ukraine. Finally, we can say that. That started in 2014, specifically the ones coming from Donetsk, Luhansk regions, the ones coming from Crimea, children of the military also. And that, of course, really deepened my understanding of what was happening to Ukrainian society. And I already was haunted by these processes because I had a feeling that our society might be going through a big, deep split between people who personally experienced the war and people who didn't. And well, unfortunately, now this breach has been set to get back together, as all Ukrainians know, and this did in fact change my positionality, and I experience it even now as I also do not conduct interviews, and I completely agree with my colleague with Gelinada that we should first reflect on ourselves and understand, okay, what processes are happening with us. And I, among other things, have discovered that, for example, I gained much better understanding of what my interviewees to whom I talked about Soviet childhood in 2015, 2016, what they were going through. And the problem is that the moment when, so I was preparing a paper for presentation next week, where I do analyze how they, how at this very particular moment in the history of Ukraine, but in their own personal history, people are trying to make sense and how they use references to their past. So this way I'm trying to address the nostalgia, widely used in Ukrainian public discourse term, arguing that it might not be very helpful if you want to understand what was happening to people. Yes, I suddenly I write the word exhausted, and then there is some kind of blank spot in my memory. And I understand that I really need to, for example, consult more with anthropologists, because as oral historians, we are not used to being in this situation, in the very same situation. So now I have this big dilemma that I need to resolve for myself, because on the one hand, when I first went into the bomb shelter, I understood that I had understood nothing. Well, it's an exaggeration, but I didn't understand a lot about the interviews that my colleagues were recording with, for example, children from Donetsk region. But then, okay, now I do understand them better. How do I work with that? Because my emotions are obviously getting into the text in my research, in my decision making. Okay, so these are the dilemmas that I'm dealing with right now, but I'm really glad that I have an opportunity and an environment in which I can proceed in resolving them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these reflections. I think we can maybe consider now, if you don't mind, going to the conversation about the Institute itself. I was very brief in my comments on what we've attempted to accomplish with this Institute altogether. I mentioned we had many applicants. I did mention we had received those to come to the Institute who have already been conducting work, because we were worried in a friendly way, not worried, but we were very much looking forward to collaborating with those individuals and learning from them about the challenges which they were facing. What are your overall impressions of the institutes? Looking back at the topics that we've covered, which ones may have resonated with you the most in the context of these evolving research agendas? Maybe why that was the case, and what would be the most important outcomes of the Institute's work for you personally? And also, of course, eventually, we all are going to be looking on these important adjustments in the methods of our work, right? That we as oral historians have to embrace going forward. Please tell me, and our audiences who are positioned in, part of the Canadian milieu, part of that bigger context, which I was learning to, with experience doing research in stable times so effectively for so long. Gelinada, maybe again you?
Yeah, okay. So once again, on my mind, that is still what touched me most of all. That is the necessity of our self-reflection and our seminar, which was devoted to the outer ethnography and our practice task. So what we proposed to our participants. So you remember that one? We asked to find something extraordinary in our Summer Institute participants' own life. So that was our task on our seminar, which was dedicated to the outer ethnography. Something very emotional, not tragic. So that was not obligatory to find some tragic part in this or that life, but something emotional that challenged the construction of meaning or even the general life world of this or that person. So in other words, what was our idea? We proposed to place ourselves in the shoes of those whom we are interviewing. We propose for oral historians, yes, to talk about their own experience. And what was the result of this proposition? You remember that only 2 persons from 50 who attended our school agreed to do that. Such a very, very difficult, emotional, self-reflective work, which was proposed to us as an oral historians. So please imagine what is for our interviewees to talk to us when they are inside the unfolding trauma. That was very, very symbolic thing for me, that we cannot do that we never do that. That for us, that is very, very big, I don't know, challenge, cultural or research challenge, or what kind of challenge that is, but it really was such. And most important outcomes, as for me, of course, that is the building of the network of the representatives of very different specialties, of very different disciplines, of academic and non-academic sphere or field of knowledge, of people who in other circumstances probably would never meet each other, and they met in our institute, and I hope that we will continue to do that. And so that is very specific thing that we started to discuss as if common thing for all of us, but our understanding of this common thing is very, very different. And that is another most important outcome for me, that we tried and we succeeded in that. We were listening to each other, we were hearing each other. I'm not sure that is the time for us to start to interpret what we are discussing or what we are already written as an oral histories. But the third, the last but not least outcome of this school for me, that is really time. 6 months are passed, so that is really time to start to produce methodological things. We do have a lot of experience already. So experience our own, the experience of our colleagues. We discussed a lot of things. That is really 6 months, that is enough. That is really enough as for me, and I talked to the people from another disciplines who are more close to understanding how the people conscious mind is working. So 6 months, that is really enough. The best, of course, that is 9 months, as you know, but 6 months, that is really enough to start to produce the new knowledge of what we have survived and already reflected. So that is my idea about outcomes of the Institute.
So what I'm hearing is that you're suggesting our next undertaking should focus on the discussion of exactly methodology, but also on the...
Yes, very practical things. And we have already started to do that in our institute, but these very practical things that they are really to be discussed. Of course, there are, and there were a lot of mistakes. There will be a lot of mistakes, but we are really to discuss them, and that is the only one way of producing the normal academic knowledge.
Thank you. We'll have to work on that. Iuliia, your podium is yours.
Well, I have two reactions actually, because I think one of the biggest undertakings, one of the biggest results and most important results for me of the school was meeting people who were working in the field, and also not just because it gave me knowledge of what is happening, but also because it allowed me to go back into, well, how do I want to see our community, and what kind of member in this community I want to be. Because at the beginning of the war, we strongly reacted to things, and we could strongly, I strongly reacted to certain things. And I really like that right now I can position myself in a way that I can disagree, but it doesn't mean that we should stop talking or that I should be contributing to hostility within our working environment. So this feeling of community and appreciation of supportive community, it's I think it's something very precious to me. As for example, that exercise about telling something very painful, our group was so unsettled by it that we actually left the room. So it was, we had such a strong protest against the very idea that we were like, oh, we need coffee. And I think, and that was very telling, I think. In fact, my big discovery after the Institute is I kept in mind the questions that we were asking. And again, yes, positionality for me, that was very, very helpful. Of course, better understanding of what community engaged research means. Again, because as historians, we are more attuned to dealing with something that supposedly is in the past. And for example, as a result, our interviewees might not be persecuted because we have because we didn't store the data properly. So in our training, we don't really emphasize these things, but they are all extremely important to take care of before we enter any research field. So that for me was also very helpful. It also affects our writing. One thing is when you write and the person will never have a chance to read it. Another thing is when you write and the person is here and now. And this person's life is still evolving, it's still changing. That's what was one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot was when my colleagues were saying that, well, what do we do if people want to talk? When they approach us and they want to talk. I finally found myself in that situation. And it was a very interesting one. It was a valuable experience for me because I did have a person on the train that wanted to tell me her story of evacuation from Kiev, which was a painful story. And it created additional questions for me as a researcher because I understood that, well, yes, she did wanted to tell me the story. Another question is, I could really not ask her questions because that picture she delivered to me was exactly what she was ready to give. Any kind of getting into deeper, really, at least I felt that I might be diving into the rabbit hole that I really don't want to discover, both for myself and for her. So that's something that we can say that, for example, people are stitching up those narratives. People are ready to tell those narratives. Well, another question is, how do we address what lies beneath them? And this is something that I'm really looking forward to talking more about methodologically.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I am deliberately keeping myself in the shadow of your conversation, partially because we have so little time. But you might remember also the presence of people like myself in the room of the Institute who live and work elsewhere outside of Ukraine, who also have to deal with questions of positionality and sense of responsibility while not being on the ground, not being displaced, and looking back at the need to get involved and be of use, be of utility to you colleagues who are on the ground and who are working there. So I'm looking forward to having more conversations, perhaps in the printed format, Gela, maybe in the conference where we'll have a session in the panel dealing with these unique positionalities of so many different voices. But also what I wanted to, just if I can very briefly, these are very dear questions to me as well. What are the adjustments? What are the outcomes? What are the pluses of our working together? Exactly, Iuliia, thank you for bringing it up. The dialogue that we've managed to build between the individual teams and your researchers who were indeed of opposing views on the entire undertaking, whether to do research or not to do. I think we've managed to have that podium built and sustained in a respectful way. And also for myself, what was also very interesting to hear, if you remember our last methodological sessions where we were asking our participants to reflect on questions of motivation and the reasons why to engage in research. What a diversity of voices we've heard, and something which I would not, relate to. Some, of course, appeal to the need to build new knowledge, to, fill the gap, to explain to the world what's going on, to educate, and so on and so forth, to help the society. And then, of course, the other reasons would be on the spectrum of empathy, on the spectrum of just simply interviewing one and only person for the value of his or her experience, no matter what. And the reference to the fact that someone might be killed tomorrow truly resonated me, because that could be an absolutely legitimate reason to do research now. So these were, reasons which were brought up into our conversations, and we did created a list of those later as well. It was also, of course, a question of legal implications of our research, which is a huge and big topic we really need to look into as we go forward further, Gelinada and Iuliia. And I hope the two of us, or the three of us, can return to this conversation later. Time is of essence. Let's consider the next couple of questions, if you don't mind. And it is going to be a very different question. So we're going to be going away from the work of the Institute, and I'd like you to consider the future. The field of oral history in Ukraine has been blossoming and expanding, and Gelinada, you've written about that so effectively and eloquently. But what is its future, given the fact that half of the country is displaced and the war is ravaging still the nation and the society and ourselves? Where do you see our field being, say, in 2 years, or maybe in 5 years? Here's the big question for you, my colleagues. I'll start with Iuliia this time, for the sake of it.
Well, I address this question again as a person who actually likes to be at the intersection of academia and civil society. And with my experience of working with the War Childhood Museum, I believe that something that this space in which I would like us to see is where our work as oral historians can really help recovery, people's recovery, and social integration as well. And this is one of the questions that I'm exploring right now. How can we be useful at the intersection of academia and production of academic knowledge, but also, first and foremost, facilitating social change? Because wars have devastating consequences, and not every society recovers from that, or not every society recovers from that fast. We also know that oral history, the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to have your voice be presented in the public space, is something that helps people return their agency, get it back. And getting back one's agency is one of the core things that helps the process of healing after certain traumatic events. So I do hope that the field of oral history will become very important, and the projects that are developing now will contribute to us. You know, that there is a book I'm now studying, From Surviving to Living. So I do hope that we will help ourselves and help other people to move from surviving to living.
Thank you. Дуже дякую. Gela.
Yeah, I fully support what Iuliia has already said to us, so that will be, yes, the strengthening of society, and I hope that our society will be much more empathical, yes, to each other than before the war, because really right now there are such a huge number of projects being realized that I imagine in 5 years we will have the tremendous amount of what to listen, what to understand, and we are not to forget being a second time or third time traumatized as an oral historians who are working with the very, very difficult and painful topic. So we didn't talk today about this issue in our practice, but how many times we are traumatized when we are listening to the other histories. If we have the same experience, or we have another experience, so that doesn't matter. So we are every time traumatized once and once again, because all of us are inside this war. We are working with the, of course, material, if we can name these interviews in such a manner, of course, we can do that. We are working with the material which is around us. So these traumas, this experience are not inscribed in the lives of our interviewees. The experience of war is not inscribed in our experience. So war is continuing. We do not know when and where it come to an end. So in 5 years, I hope very much that everything will be stabilized. But this great amount of very, very different oral histories will give us an opportunity, I don't know, to write the hundreds of articles. So as researchers, we will be so happy to have such sources in our hands. But on the other side, we are to be very, very careful and very, very, once again, self-reflective, every time asking ourselves for what we are doing so. Because as for me, to build our careers on the suffering of other peoples, that is very bad thing. That is the worst what could happen to the academic, to this or that person who is writing this or that book. So that's why, once again, we are to be attentive, very, very self-reflective, and very responsible as a historians and as a human beings. And another thing I would like to emphasize, I think that in 5 years, oral history will be mostly visual history, because that is the most fashion type of sharing of experience, knowledge, project results, and so on. We are slowly moving in the direction of visualization of the results of our projects. So I think that we will face a lot of films. And probably that could be the point for the future discussion, how to compose the films which are based on oral histories. Because I don't know, the TV, I don't know, products or radio, of course, that is another thing. But I think that mostly our oral histories will be shared as certain films or certain teasers or certain series or something visual, because really that is most fashion thing of distributing knowledge and distributing experience. So that is my things about what will happen in several years.
I cannot resist but respond to that. I think you are right in one way, that the media in which we will be communicating the outcomes of our research certainly is the one enhanced by digital tools, visualization tools. But I'm such a believer in narration and self-reflexivity in verbal form. I don't think it will go anywhere away. Maybe that will be something to consider. The spectrum of our work begins with storytelling or narration. And then what we do with our collected material, of course, is going to change, or is already changing dramatically. Look at the films that you are producing. But if I may, a couple of words, I am, for the audience, I am talking to leading oral historians, and Gelinada Grinchenko has been chairing the Oral History Association of Ukraine for a while, being indeed the powerful ambassador of oral history of Ukraine internationally. I envision that oral history of Ukraine will become a leading field in this area of oral history and around the world, for the experience and expertise it's going to be building on the basis of this ongoing work. But also, if you will look back at the very history, foundations of this research in Ukraine, it will not escape us that our work as oral historians have always focused on previous trauma. It's always about, or most of the case, it's about the previous wars, deprivations, deportations, famines, Holodomor, and so on and so forth. The history of Ukraine had predetermined the direction of our work for so long. So the question remains whether we will be able to develop room and opportunities for, foci, which are very familiar here in Ukraine and Canada, or in Canada for that matter, where people continue on with oral historical work, focusing not necessarily on trauma as such. This is just a question for myself for the future. Hopefully there will be times and opportunities for this work. We have about 10 minutes left before the end of the session. We anyway agreed that presenters could ask each other a few questions, but if you would like to consider those in the chat, and a couple of people waiting in the room to ask you questions, you choose which route you'd like to go, Gila and Iuliia. If you have questions to each other, so your moment is here, but if it's not, we can look into the
Probably we can chat in Messenger and let our participants ask questions.
We'll continue our yes, let's continue to the questions. Marina, would you take over, or do you want me to?
If you can just continue, but I know that Alex has a question and Claudia had a comment. Yeah.
Are you okay, Iuliia and Gelinada? Will look into the audience questions because we have very interesting questions here. Claudia, thank you for your first question. The trauma, war, and oral-related experiences have tremendous long-term impacts on persons and high potential to manifest as PTSD. Due to PTSD, experiences may not be fully described as the mind often shuts out extreme and painful memories. So wondering why the suggestion was made to not interview people too early in the war.
That is, yes, the question for me, why not to interview the people too early? Because as an oral historian, so we do not know, we don't have this certain educational background, how to talk to people which are in their process of ongoing trauma, I think. And this my thought I'm basing on my own experience, because I really, as a person who survived this and that bombing and escaping and very terrible road to Germany and so on and so forth, and losing of my home, damaging of my home, and other things. So I really don't want to be asked by somebody while I am inside my trauma, because yes, I'm thinking about that every time and every minute. And I do not want to be traumatized with not a very highly educated person who would like to talk to me, I don't know with what objectives and for what. So that is really so, and I emphasize that at every discussion, that I base this my skeptical understanding of the very early project only on my own experience and on experience of those who were with me as refugees in Germany at the very beginning of April, and so when we only came here and when we were standing in this and that authorities to ask for these or that documents. Of course, we talk to each other, and sometimes I asked these people, do you want to be interviewed? Do you want to share your experience? And do you want to talk to somebody? And really, right now, I am not ready to articulate their answers, what they are thinking about interviewing and about trying to get into their experience. So that is only my experience, and once again, I'm based my skeptical attitude to the very early interviewing only on that. Right now, I'm ready to talk to my colleagues, to researchers, to write something and to do something like that, but please consider that too. Then when you are applying for the interview for the people who just leave this or that very dangerous place, that for them is so traumatic, so painful. My son is talking that I am to go to, so I am to finish. So that I'm very, very sorry. I am, yes, to stop.
Thank you, Gila. Iuliia, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I would add from a different perspective, because right now I'm developing a course on oral history, trauma, and experiencing extreme violence. From a psychological perspective, the trauma happens when our psyche is not capable to, I would say, process something that is happening to us. It's bigger than, and thus it is symbolizes not so safe, and that's why we start dealing with it in parts when we are ready. That's why, for example, there is a rule in psychotherapy: you do not work with trauma until the traumatizing situation ends. If the person continues to be in that situation, nobody is addressing that trauma, and there are certain traumatic things in person's experience that first you need to build up different mechanisms on which you can rely, and only then a professional therapist will lead a person into creating a new narrative, rethinking what has happened. So when we, people without diplomas in psychology, people who are not certified psychotherapists, are trying to ask questions to a person whose psychological apparatus is still, has still not developed the mechanisms through which they can safely process their experiences, we are actually increasing the potential for PTSD developing, and we're just creating a situation when a person might be going through something very, very painful. And I don't think that our scholarly goals are really worth that. So, and also by far not all people develop PTSD. It's actually not such a very high percentage. And what really contributes to PTSD often is the unsupportive environment in which a person finds him or herself after the event, as people often say, accident has happened. So there might be other ways to help people not develop such long-term effects.
Thank you, Iuliia. I think we have Alex Averbrook wanting to engage with our presenters. Alex, proшу. Do you want to just unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sounds like Iuliia has an appropriate and extensive knowledge for interviewing people in trauma. But thank you, really thank you for your important work. My question is, and a comment, a very short comment. Why do you focus on the interview-based research only? And how about other modalities, modes of testimonies? For example, one of the biggest, largest databases of testimonies held by the Jerusalem Yad Vashem Museum consists of testimonies written by the witnesses themselves. They are not interview-based, and I understand that interviews are traumatic both for those who are conducting interviews sometimes, and both for the interviewees. But if the witnesses are willing themselves to share their experiences, and this happens not rarely, why not to do this? And so my question is, I guess, what are the benefits, in your opinion, of the interview-based research and archival collections of testimonies as opposed to others? For example, as I mentioned, testimonials provided in a written form, for example, by witnesses themselves. And if suggested by Dr. Grinchenko, we still haven't reached this convenient, both professional and personal emotional point for such interview-based collections. Till when should we wait? You mentioned half a year, 5 years, and maybe while we are waiting to be sort of settled with our interviewees' emotions, we can approach the witnesses in other forms. And if we do choose to wait with the interviewees, what might be other alternative venues of collection for these unique materials which you consider as appropriate now? And because in my opinion, maybe from a perspective of a literary historian, collecting materials, collecting testimonials in real time, when, and following up Claudia's question or comment, when it's still fresh, hot, it's crucial for validity of such testimonials, as they are always determined by time and space, which are fast changeable, and testimonials collected today would be quite different from testimonials collected from the same persons in half a year. And I see a huge methodological potential in even in comparing, different testimonials taken from same person. So, but thank you very much for the institute and this conference. I just was browsing for the program and for today's panels.
Thank you. Any takers? Iuliia, I see you are reacting already to Alex's questions.
Well, the problem is that I think we should be respectful of the traditions and knowledge that different methodological schools develop. That is why there might be an assumption that literary theory might not be preparing people to work with oral history. Exactly. So in answering your question, I would need like 15 minutes to explain the fact that even if we are talking about writing a testimony, there is an initiation, and why it is important that I am the person asking for it. Then there is another thing, very practical. A colleague of mine was trying to do autoethnography during the first months of war. She had a panic attack somewhere on the 5th minute, and she decided that maybe not. I had a very emotional moment when I was writing a scholarly article. So no, this is not safer, even though you control the process better. But then we have the huge question, why are we doing that? And we have a huge question of what is the difference in the situations of now and the Holocaust? What are the preservation techniques available to us? What do we want to learn? So yes, of course, studying immediate reactions to certain events. And by the way the stories people tell, they do change in time, and that's normal. And thing is that it's not necessarily something gets corrupted over time. We actually do pay attention to different details. So if somebody interviewed me in March about how I was evacuating from Kyiv, I can assure you that I wouldn't have provided that imaginary full and correct, I don't know, to the events account. Normally, because people don't do that even under normal circumstances, especially in the circumstances where, for example, they don't feel their body. They actually dissociated. So what are we going to do? Are we going to do medical check before we work? What's yeah, and if my colleagues want to add, because it's a very long topic.
Thank you.
It's really a very long topic, and from one side, nothing to add to what Iuliia have said. It means not 15, but I don't know, several hours, yes, to discuss this difference. But in 2 words, when you are writing testimony, you are alone. And in interview, there are 2 people who are talking and who are creating the document together. So the one person is historian with his intention to do something, and another person is the partner of interview with his intention to share something. So that is so different types of witnessing when you are writing something, whom you are talking, whom you are addressing, and so on and so on. And when you are together with the human being and you are so communicating, and this new knowledge is appearing due and because and after your conversation. So that's why I think, yes, of course, we are to collect and to propose different, to initiate the different type of conducting, creating the documents, so written or oral. But I don't know how to, and I'm confused. I really don't know how to start the project of the written witnessing. So to propose whom, so hey guys, you are welcome to write something about and how. So how to start this project?
Probably. Well, there are I can list around 10 projects that are already existing since the start of the war.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely, I trust you. So I don't know, I know nothing about that. So for me, as for oral historian, so that is absolutely other field of knowledge, and really, I would like to explain and to continue this discussion about the difference, and that is really very, very different. And I think that why to do that, and why not to do that? That is, let's do this, that, and other types of. And we are today talking about oral history and interview-based research because, you know, from the very first day of war, this project started. And of course, there were a lot of mistakes, there were a lot of successes, and we are discussing still the normal academic practice of what to do in the circumstances which we never faced before. So that is why to choose this or that type of, I don't know, witnessing, that is, I don't know, open-end question. Thank you.
Thank you. This is great to see a very strong dialogue going between the participants and our audiences. Thank you very much for bringing up these questions. We do find oral history being closely related to the fields of anthropology and ethnography because of exactly the persona, indeed the persona of a researcher embedded in the discursive field of self-reflexivity. It's enhanced, it's reframed, it's developed to absolutely new levels, as my colleagues have pointed out, and it's extremely dialogic. And dialogue is the propeller of knowledge and propeller of communication and documentation. We believe in that as oral historians. I'd like us to thank, I would like to thank my colleagues and co-participants in the Witnessing the War Summer Institute. I'd like to bring up also the fact that we actually, as a team, we've reflected a little bit on this very work before within the framework of the German-Ukrainian Historical Commission. We also hosted a session there. We also are working on the next Summer Institute together with other partners in Europe. So the work will to be continued, and I commend my colleagues and I request that they are focusing along with us, of course, here on indeed producing some methodologically focused publications on how to do it in times of war. Thank you.